Theodore Roosevelt, our 26th president, when he's making his arguments against any individual, any nation, living a life of ignoble ease, penned these words. Far better it is to dare mighty things, to win glorious triumphs, though checkered by failure, than to take company with those poor, timid souls that neither enjoy much nor suffer much, for they live in the great twilight that knows neither victory nor defeat. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great honor to be here with you. Thank you, Greg, for your kind introduction. So on behalf of our center director and almost 11,000 men and women that serve the Republic here, that I welcome you to the John F. Kennedy Space Center, a name that's been written indelibly on the tapestry that's the history of our nation and of all humankind. But it's not enough just to welcome you. I need to welcome you home, because I believe that a part of all of us resides here. That part deep inside of us that must explore and must look beyond the next horizon to understand our world and pass on a legacy to the next generation. That part of us resides here. Welcome home. You know, I think individuals and organizations and nations have to continue to ask themselves the question, where are our best days? Are they behind us, or do they still lay in front of us? If we ask ourselves that question today, were our best days sometime in the distant past, with Apollo and Gemini and Mercury and Voyager, Pioneer, Viking, or are they some place in our future? For I submit to you, if we answer that they're behind us, we're no longer a great nation. Is that clear to me? My study of history and my travels throughout the world, I've been to places in their own day and own time that have been great nations and great empires. And they celebrate all the stuff they used to do. They do no longer. As a consequence, they're no longer great nations. But my spirit is lifted as I have been in this auditorium for the balance of the day. Listen to these wonderful speakers that represent the best that lives in all of us. To discern their passion and their commitment to something that's bigger than themselves. That speaks to me, and I trust it speaks to you. In this mission, GRAIL is another step to a future that I believe, and I bend my knee in apology to no one for this, that I believe our best days lay before us. That the challenges that we experience today, it's just our time. They're no graver, no heavier than past generations. But that the good and noble people that are bringing this mission to life demonstrate unconditionally that our best days are in front of us. And for me personally, it's a great honor to be standing here representing the men and women of this wonderful place called the John F. Kennedy Space Center, and by extension, all of NASA, and all the partners that are making this possible. And I'd like to think, without them being conscious of it, that in some part we're driven by the words of the greatest of all Americans, in my view, Abraham Lincoln, when he penned these words. And now beware of rashness. Beware of rashness, but with energy and sleepless vigilance, go forward and bring us victories. GRAIL, in my mind, is bringing us victories. Tomorrow, Lord willing, we're going to be watching this magnificent launch. You're going to be staring with tear-dimmed eyes at the mighty rocket as it traces its fiery path to the heavens. And then you're going to hear a very special sound that emanates from this place. If you sit very quietly and listen very carefully, you can hear it now. Hear it? Sure you do. The sound, you ask, the sound of many hearts that beat as one. To beat as one in common purpose, shared sacrifice and devotions, And now your heart is beating with mine and mine with yours, and none of us will ever be the same again. I want to add my most sincere and enthusiastic go Delta and Godspeed the mighty spaceship GRAIL. And I want to say one more time, welcome home. We've been expecting you. Thank you.
It's always great to listen to Colonel Daddy. Our next speaker is from the Jet Propulsion Lab, and in case you don't know, NASA has 10 centers located across the country. We're, of course, one of them. Jet Propulsion Lab is in California. And our next speaker is General Eugene Tatini, who is the Deputy Director of the Jet Propulsion Lab. He joined NASA in 2008, and as the Deputy Director out there, he basically is the Chief Operating Officer, so he looks over not only the technical activity that's going on, but the business activity that's going on. JPL has a storied history, and he's going to tell you just a little bit about that. And it's a facility that has about 5,000 workers, engineers, scientists, business people, technicians, and it generates about $1.5 billion for the economy. General Tatini.
Good afternoon, everyone. Let me add my welcome to that of Joe's to your this afternoon as we all join together. As an Air Force officer, it's always interesting and quite frankly a privilege to speak after Colonel Joe Dowdy. He is just an example of the kind of folks that we put the leadership responsibility to as they lead our young men and women into harm's way. And Joe is in fact one of those kind of people, as I'm sure you could tell. Joe always runs over his time though, and I always kid him that the Marines have a very difficult time telling time. And if it hadn't been for us making the switch from analog to digital watches, they would have never learned to tell time. But in all seriousness, we do appreciate his service, and those in the military arm, I think, can understand the enthusiasm and the patriotism that comes through in introductions like that. Let me switch gears for a second and talk to you just for a minute about what you're going to hear for the remainder of this hour and try to put it into a little bit of a context for you. The National Aeronautics and Space Administration spends somewhere in the neighborhood of about $19 billion a year of our well-earned taxpayers' money. And in order to prioritize the kinds of things that we do within NASA, we leave it up to the science community to run their kinds of competitions. A group of scientists gets together and formulates a number of scientifically compelling questions that they would like answers to, and then they compete amongst their peers for a portion of that $19 billion or whatever the budget would happen to be. In this particular case, the science team under the leadership of Dr. Maria Zuber formulated a number of very scientifically compelling questions about our moon, and they were selected amongst a number of other groups of scientists for this particular mission. The scientific community then defines the requirements for the instrumentation, for the measurements that need to be made. The men and women at the Jet Propulsion Lab were privileged to participate in the manufacture and design of a number of those instruments. The instruments are then incorporated on a spacecraft. The Lockheed Martin Corporation was selected to build the spacecraft, and the instrumentation is incorporated on. And they also went through the assembly, test, and launch operation of the integrated spacecraft under the supervision of the men and women of the Jet Propulsion Lab. Then the spacecraft is incorporated on a launch vehicle. The launch vehicle in this particular case is a Delta II rocket provided to us by the men and women of the United Launch Alliance. They also are under the oversight and leadership of the Launch Systems Program Office here at the Kennedy Space Center. We fly across an Air Force range that is controlled and operated by the men and women of the 45th Space Wing. And as we get in orbit around the lunar surface and that information is brought back, the spacecraft is flown by a combination of JPL and Lockheed Martin Corporation. The science is then taken by the science team under Dr. Zuber's leadership. Hopefully it is deduced that at some point in her career, perhaps there's a Nobel Prize somewhere in the making as we do these kind of things. The point I'm trying to make here is you're going to hear from a number of different organizations that are comprised of thousands and thousands of men and women, all cooperating and integrated with an effort to provide the kind of capability and the type of launch that you're going to see tomorrow. So as each one of these speakers gets up, remember, put that in that kind of a context, if you would. Let me brag for a second about the Jet Propulsion Lab. This is under the guise of a paid political announcement, if you will. JPL put the United States of America into space. On the 30th of January, 1958, the JPL folks launched Explorer 1. It was the first artificial Earth orbiting satellite launched by the United States, and we have been in business ever since that time. And as we visit this morning, if I could have the next slide, please, this afternoon, if you count the twin GRAIL spacecraft, we will have, under the operational control of the Jet Propulsion Lab, some 21 spacecraft and 9 major instruments, either in orbit around the particular planet that we live on or somewhere in the solar system. Just to point out, too, if you look down in the bottom left-hand corner of this slide, you'll see the 2 Voyager spacecraft, the farthest man-made objects that we're aware of from the planet that we live on today. I think the scientific community is now in general agreement that at least one of the Voyager spacecraft has gone through the terminator shock and is now into interstellar space. In other words, it's beyond the influence of the sun, our star, and heading into the interstellar space. And if you look in the middle column here, we now have continued and have had for about the last decade continuous presence either on the surface of or in orbit around the planet Mars. Okay? So that's just 2 examples of the kind of work that the folks at JPL do. We have in this past 12 months launched a spacecraft called Aquarius, which is an Earth orbiting ocean salinity measurement spacecraft. We have launched Juno, which is on its way to Jupiter. We are about to launch GRAIL and then let's go to the next slide, please. In Thanksgiving week of this year, give or take a day or two, on the 25th of November, we will launch the Mars Science Laboratory program, a spacecraft called Curiosity. It will land on the surface of Mars in the August time frame, and then to finish this cycle of launch campaigns at the Jet Propulsion Lab, in the February time frame, we will launch an X-ray telescope, something called N.A.S.A. It will be launched out of the Kwajalein Islands on a Pegasus spacecraft that is carried aloft by an L-1011 spacecraft. So with that, that's a brief introduction to the GRAIL mission and a brief introduction and overview about the Jet Propulsion Lab. We're thrilled that you're with us. We hope that we will carry back the message of great science and the great work that the National Aeronautics and Space Administration does. And with that, I will leave you. Go GRAIL, go Delta II. Thank you very much.